All right, welcome again. My name is Sarah Stork. I'm the project manager of the FLEGT Independent Market Monitor. And I would like to welcome all of you, not just in the name of the IMM, but also in the name of the International Tropical Timber Organization, which hosts the IMM project. ITTO's officer in charge, Steve Johnson, is trying to be with us today. He's had a chance for some last-minute COVID jab this morning, so he's still on his way. But he will be there later to answer questions that might be dedicated to the ITTO. Before we get started with the content of this webinar, just a couple of technical notes. If you have any questions during the presentation, please feel free to answer them anytime using this question and answer button here. If you can, please try to use the Q&A function and not chat, because it's much easier to sort through the questions there. On the other hand, if you have any technical issues, the chat button is here, and just send them to our administrators and they will try to assist you. You're muted at the moment and the videos are switched off. I'd like to ask you to keep this so in order not to exceed the technical capacity. But if you wish to be unmuted to make an intervention, this will be possible at the end of the webinar during the question and answer session. Then just raise your hand or use the chat button to highlight that you would like to be unmuted and contribute directly. The webinar is being recorded and it's also being live streamed in order to enable all registrants to participate in the webinar. We were very happy with the strong turnout we saw in registrations, especially also that the private sector seems to take quite a big interest in this webinar, with around 30% of the participants coming from the private sector. But there are also several international organizations, government agencies, research bodies, consultancies, certification systems with us here today, and really from all over the world, not just from Europe, which we are also finding very interesting and exciting. So we are looking forward to an interesting exchange during the Q&A session at the end. And again, a very warm welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, and good night to all of you, wherever you are. Before we come to the opening presentation, just a few words on the IMM, because I don't think everybody has been in touch with us yet. The IMM is actually a project mandated by some of the FLEGT VPAs. In particular detail, it is embedded in the Indonesian VPA, where the function of the independent market monitor is laid out in a special annex. And the scope of the duties defined there are to monitor the release for free circulation of FLEGT licensed timber in the European Union market, to monitor the performance of such timber in relation to competing timbers, and also to monitor the effects of market-related measures, other market-related measures that might be taken in the EU on such timbers. All in all, there's a broad framework of 52 IMM indicators, which we monitor against using trade flow analysis and market research. For the trade flow analysis, we take quite a broad range of statistical sources into account. They're being cleaned. My colleague Rupert is going to explain more about that in a bit. And of course, in order to understand all the data we are collecting correctly, we do a lot of market research in 5 EU countries and in the UK, as well as in VPA partner countries. Our outputs, like special studies, annual reports, and website news are publicly available on the IMM website, and the newsletter is also freely circulated. So I'm now handing over to Rupert Oliver. He's the trade analyst for the IMM, does all the number crunching, and will give an overview now on trade over the last 12 months or 18 months, and of course, especially in the context of this special situation we are having with the COVID pandemic. Rupert, please take over.
Thanks, Sarah. Yes, thank you very much, and good morning. Yes, I'm going to, as Sarah said, give you a brief overview of recent trends in trade flows from the perspective of the FLEGT VPA process, and of course, focusing to some extent on the impacts of the COVID pandemic, particularly on the tropical wood trade. Just as a reminder to those people who are not aware, this data that I'm using, a lot of it derives from a joint initiative that has been operating between the ITTO and the Global Timber Forum for a while, the Sustainable Timber Information Exchange. The website address is there, sticks.global. That provides access, easy access to data on 46 reporting countries worldwide, most of the large industrialized countries and the largest tropical exporting countries on a monthly basis. And we also have the Independent Market Monitor also has its own online dashboard, which provides a lot of detailed data. Again, the most recent monthly data specifically on the trade by the VPA partner countries, both globally and with the EU, and the domain names are provided there. Now, first, just to give you a brief overview of how the value of global trade has changed over the last couple of years. I'm looking very specifically at wood products in the harmonized system of product codes 44, chapter 44, and wood products in the furniture chapter HS 94. What we see here is quite interesting and perhaps rather surprising in that last year in 2020, the total value of trade in all these products worldwide declined only marginally, only by about 1.6%. Whereas actually exports by tropical countries last year in terms of value actually increased slightly by 2%. Now, there are various reasons for this. The most obvious is that if you look at the trend between 2018 and 2019, that was when there was a very large decline in trade, and that was mainly driven by the trade dispute between China and the United States, which of course led to quite a big decline in exports from China into its major market, and also a decline in China's own imports of primary wood products during that year. What you'll also see here is that if you take Vietnam out of the export data for tropical countries, there was a significant decline. In fact, we've taken Mexico out as well, because that also was influenced by the US-China trade dispute. Both countries actually saw a large increase, particularly Vietnam, in exports from there to the United States in the year 2020. If we're looking specifically at Indonesia, which is of course of considerable interest to us because it is the only country so far that is licensing products under the FLEGT VPA process. Been licensing since November 2016. And what you see is that here there was a big increase in exports from Indonesia worldwide in 2018, but then that was followed by a large decrease, and that was partly or considerably driven by the decline in plywood exports in 2019. 2019 was a very weak year for the plywood trade generally, and then in 2020, the value dropped again, but perhaps by not as much as might have been expected, given the extraordinary trade environment last year, by 5.2%. Incidentally, I'm going to focus very much on wood and wood furniture. I'll make passing reference at times to paper and pulp products, because of course these are very important exports from Indonesia, but from reasons of time and because it's such a complicated export trade and trade worldwide, I won't be talking in detail about the pulp and paper industry. I'll just note here that if Indonesia's exports of all timber and timber products, including pulp and paper, is considered, exports fell 2.8% from Indonesia last year to US 12 billion. Now, again, just to give you a brief overview of how the global tropical wood trade has changed and how it relates specifically to the VPA partner process. I'm sure most of you don't need to be reminded of which countries are involved in the VPA process. Of course, we have Indonesia already licensing. Then we have one large country implementing a VPA in Vietnam in Asia. We have 5 countries in Africa implementing a VPA. And then there are 2 countries in Latin America, Guyana and Honduras, which have yet to ratify a VPA, although the text of the VPAs has been agreed. And then we have several countries in Africa and Asia, which are negotiating VPAs, and some of them have been for some considerable length of time. And at this stage, it doesn't seem likely that some of those countries will finalize a VPA in the near future. But irrespective of that, even if we consider just the implementing countries and the licensing countries worldwide and the initial VPA countries, even those countries alone account for nearly 50% of total trade in exports from tropical countries worldwide. And that percentage has been increasing significantly in recent times. And that particularly has been driven, of course, by Vietnam. The trade trends in Vietnam have been particularly extraordinary, and I'll explain those in a few minutes. The other thing I want to emphasize in terms of global trade is the extent to which due diligence requirements or some form of legality requirement is imposed on imports into major consumer markets around the world. If we look at total trade in wood and wood furniture products around the world, already over about 60% of import trade is covered by some sort of regulation requiring due diligence or due care with respect to the imported wood products. So quite a considerable proportion of the trade is covered. And that is not even including China, which is the largest country here identified as a non-regulated market. We're not including it as a regulated market at this stage, even though in the 2019 Forestry Act of China, they did introduce this Article 65, which did indicate that there was a legal obligation to ensure that all woods came from legal sources. But as this has not yet been expanded by meaningful regulations, we're not yet including it as a regulated market. But even without China, as I emphasize, nearly 2/3 of imports worldwide of wood and wood furniture products are into markets where there is some sort of due diligence requirement. So it's very important to emphasize to how extensive in terms of scale and engagement the FLEGT process and FLEG related policy measures have become in recent times. Now, just moving on to briefly look at some of the key trends in exports and production from the leading VPA partner countries in terms of licensing and in terms of supply. Looking first at Indonesia's log production. I put it here next to a slide that actually I put this slide up partly because it provides reference to an important study that ITTO is just about to produce. It's Technical Series 49, which is providing an outlook study for the whole of the tropical wood trade from between now and the year 2050, which also takes account of changes that might result as a result of COVID. That technical series report number 49 is in preparation, but it will be published, I understand, on the ITTO website within a matter of weeks. So look out for technical series 49. I just highlighted one of the things that's identified in that report here, which is showing very clearly how the nature of wood supply in tropical countries has altered in recent times. You see how the production in natural forests worldwide in the tropics has remained fairly flat over the last 30 years, whereas production in plantations has been rising dramatically during exactly that same period. And total production worldwide from plantations in the tropics has, from natural forests actually, has decreased from 60% to about 33% over the last 30 years. Indonesia falls very much into this pattern. You can see here on the right-hand side how log production in Indonesia from natural forest concessions has remained flat over the long term, over the last 10 years here, but certainly the level of plantation production has increased very dramatically. So a lot of the supplies now from Indonesia derive from plantations rather than from natural forests. At the same time, there's been a certain amount of increase in production from community forests, reflecting recent Indonesian policy to give to provide more access to communities to forest resources. Now, this shows monthly Indonesian exports of wood worldwide, wood and wood furniture products over to the period to February 2021, the most recent data that we have access to. What you can see here is that overall monthly exports from Indonesia have been broadly flat over that period. There's no strong COVID signal in the total export value. The only thing you can say is that the annual shutdown or slowdown that occurs during the Ramadan period, that did start early in 2020. There was a dip in exports from Indonesia in April, but it was followed by a very strong rebound during the rest of the year to December. And then if you look at the bottom chart there, you can see that the US has been very strongly driving this recovery. It's been offsetting a steep decline in exports, particularly to Japan, which started actually at the end of 2019, particularly due to the weakness in the plywood sector then. And if you look at the lines for EU27 imports from Indonesia and the UK, you can see that they've basically followed the lockdown period. So there was a dip in the second quarter of 2020, followed by a brief recovery in the third quarter, and then a dip in the fourth quarter. But overall, trade was relatively flat with the EU last year. This is turning over to look at Vietnam. What's been happening with their trade flows in the last 5 years on a monthly basis. Again, very clear trend here, a rising trend right the way through the period from 2015 and gradually accelerating during 2019. And this was driven partly by the US-China trade dispute, particularly in 2019, when a lot of trade that previously was between China and Vietnam was reoriented towards Vietnam. There's been quite a lot of investment in furniture manufacturing, particularly in Vietnam, to supply particularly the US market. You can see here that the first COVID lockdown coincided with and extended the usual early year slowdown in trade. In the first couple of months of the year is usually quite a big slowdown in the furniture trade worldwide. But then after the initial lockdown period, there was a very rapid recovery in trade from the middle of 2020. And if you look at the figures below, you can see how that breaks down by countries of imports. And what's remarkable here is that in terms of imports, the United States is now importing around $1 billion per month of wood products from Vietnam. And actually all other import regions, including the EU, is now dwarfed by this trade with the United States. Just turning briefly to the African VPA implementing countries, the 5 countries there that are involved in implementing a VPA. The trade with these countries globally tends to be extremely volatile. I put 3-month rolling average imports here because the monthly changes are so volatile, but even on the 3-month rolling average basis, you can see that the trade is very volatile. The other thing you can see here is that the trade was already sharply declining in the early months of 2020, even before the COVID impact in most of the industrialized world. Of course, in China, it was already affecting the Chinese market, and much of the slowdown was in fact driven by this trade flow between Cameroon and China during that period, although also exports to the EU were also declining even before the COVID pandemic. And then actually after the COVID pandemic hit in Europe, there was actually a bit of an upturn in imports from these African implementing countries. A lot of reasons for this. Of course, we're looking at import value here. There was an increase in unit values because prices in Europe, as in North America, for wood products have been rising very rapidly ever since the start of the pandemic because of the supply problems, which has actually coincided with quite a strong increase in demand, driven by government stimulus measures, driven by a lot of people improving their houses during the lockdown periods, improving their gardens, which created quite a lot of good new demand for furniture products in Europe and in North America. And of course, with African trade, there is a long lead time between orders and deliveries. So a lot of those deliveries in the first half of last year, which were rising, they would have been from orders from many months before. What we've seen recently, though, there's been declining trade between these African countries and the rest of the world ever since the end of last year and into the first quarter this year. And by all accounts, talking to traders, the supply situation in Africa now is extremely tight. Prices which haven't risen for some considerable time in Africa actually now look like they will be, the higher prices that have been attained in recent months will be attained over the long term. Now, just turning to look at EU and UK imports of wood and wood furniture from outside the bloc, this just to focus specifically on the EU market, how it's changed for tropical wood products in the recent period. This is actually looking at the long-term trend over the last 16 years. On the left-hand side, I've shown how the trend in all wood imports into the EU has changed. Dependent on which unit you use, the trends are rather different. In fact, if you look at euro-based imports in terms of euro value, they've been rising gradually since the financial crisis. In fact, in 2019, hit a peak, the highest level over a period of 10 years. In dollar terms, though, the imports remained relatively flat over that period. That's because, of course, the dollar was strengthening against the euro relative to the euro during that period. But the big change was this huge increase in terms of tonnage between the end of the financial crisis and 2015. And what happened there was a big transformation in the EU market. Large volumes of relatively lower value products, very cheap products came in, particularly from China, and then to a larger extent from the CIS region, from Russia itself, from Belarus, and from Ukraine. And that drove a big transformation in the market. A lot of manufacturing was moving to Eastern Europe during that time. There was also a currency crisis in Eastern Europe during that time. The value of the ruble and of the Ukrainian currency both crashed. And that drove quite a large increase in total EU imports of wood products during that period, which actually has a very direct bearing on Indonesian products, particularly because one of the major product groups imported from that region is plywood, birch plywood, which competes very directly with Indonesian plywood. So the very strong bearing on the share of tropical wood products, and particularly from Indonesia as a result of that trend. If you look on the right-hand side, you can see how the overall share of tropical wood in the EU market declined between 2004 from about 35% down to about 25% in 2014, and then it was sliding gradually between then and 2019. It recovered a little bit in 2019. Actually, that was driven to some extent by the FLEGT licensing process in Indonesia gaining a bit more share. But 2020 was a very poor year generally for tropical wood in the EU market, and that has a lot to do with logistics. Just looking at the short-term trends briefly in UK and EU imports of tropical wood and wood furniture. On the left-hand side, we see the most recent monthly data for imports of tropical wood into the EU plus UK. You can see how COVID led to imports in May last year, dropping to about 50%, or well, 80% below anyway, the value of the previous year during the same period. But then they did rebound strongly. And in fact, in March this year, they hit a level which was only second to April 2005, I think, no, sorry, 2019, when that was the highest monthly import in the last 15 years or so. So in March this year, it was the second highest level of monthly import of tropical wood products in dollar terms into the EU and UK market. And that was a very strong rebound. But if you look on the right-hand side, this is showing the overall trade in unit volume, in metric tons here it's showing. And you'll see, even though there was a rise in 2019, the general trend in terms of volume of imports from the tropics has been a continuous slide, really, over the period from 2015 back to the current period now. So it's an open question as to whether that can recover in the future. Here we're just looking at quarterly UK imports into the EU and UK of tropical wood and wood products. On the left-hand side, we're looking at furniture products. You can see how the furniture sector tends obviously to be very seasonal, so a lot of variation. The dip in the second quarter last year was particularly deep, but there was a very strong rebound in the subsequent quarters to the end of the first quarter this year. The trade trends in terms of value for the other product groups have been much more subdued. The notable thing is, amongst most of these is actually trade was sliding in tropical imports for most of these groups. Even during 2019, there was a dip for some of these groups, of course, during the first lockdown, but again, it looks like mainly a recovery since then in terms of value. And then the right-hand side, particularly obvious trend there is a lot of the volatility in recent times has been due to the UK, particularly hard hit by the coronavirus pandemic. Also, the UK tends to take more of the furniture, which is more seasonal in any case, but the particularly sharp dip in the UK imports, and of course the impact of Brexit as well, undermining a certain level of confidence in the UK economy. Elsewhere, you can see again the decline was basically a decline in a lot of countries in imports of tropical timber until even before COVID began, and actually in terms of value, a bit of a rise driven by this improvement in general consumption levels. One thing at the bottom, Denmark, particularly interesting, gradual rise in imports from the tropics. This is almost all from Ecuador, balsa wood used for the manufacture of wind turbines. Looking at the trend specifically for Indonesian timber products into the EU from Indonesia over this longer period from 2013 to 2020, we've got 4 years prior to licensing through 2013 and 2016, and followed by the years after licensing from 2017 through to 2020. Obvious trend is the actual significant rise in imports after licensing, quite an encouraging sign from the perspective of the FLEGT licensing system, followed by quite a dramatic fall last year. And this is driven to a large extent, of course, by the pandemic, but it's been particularly, it had such a particular influence on imports from Indonesia and other Southeast Asian countries because of the problems with shipments, getting containers out of Asia, the problems reported earlier in the Suez Canal, a whole host of problems creating serious logistic challenges for product imports from Southeast Asia in the last 18 months, and that has had a really big impact on imports from Indonesia into the EU. It's worth just pointing here briefly to the pulp and paper imports into the EU and UK from Indonesia. Again, also showed quite a substantial rise after licensing, and much of this into just 2 countries, into the UK and interestingly into Greece, although that trend has also reversed again during the pandemic period. This is the main product groups imported annually from Indonesia into the UK and EU markets. It shows quite clearly that the large increase up until 2019 was driven particularly by furniture and joinery products, particularly door products. Indonesia's got quite a good trade in doors into the EU and UK markets, and also quite a lot of laminated kitchen tops and that sort of product. These products increased quite substantially up until 2019, but then imports fell again in 2020. Other product groups, plywood was rising up until 2018, but big problems in the plywood business in 2019 led to a decline then, and that's just deepened since the start of the pandemic. Other products have been generally declining from Indonesia over the long term, particularly flooring. The countries on the right-hand side that have been particularly dominant in the trade with Indonesia, Netherlands, very strong rise, particularly in furniture imports into the Netherlands in 2019. That's fallen away. The UK was rising also strongly between 2015 and 2019, fallen away. Germany, though, however, and Belgium, other countries, direct imports from Indonesia have been generally declining and weakening. So quite a lot of work to be done there to improve market access for licensed timber. This is just looking at the 12-month rolling average figure for EU and UK imports of wood and wood furniture from Indonesia, just to show the more recent trends to March 2021. It just highlights that in the first quarter of this year, furniture imports from Indonesia have remained relatively flat, but we are seeing recovery in imports of joinery products, moldings and decking products, but plywood also has remained quite flat. And then if we look at the countries on the right-hand side, the Netherlands is still quite flat, but there's a bit of a recovery in the UK, slight upturn in Germany, Belgium just beginning to recover. Other countries, the overall trend has remained quite flat and stable. Turning to imports from the VPA implementing countries into the EU and UK market over the recent times. Vietnam on the left-hand side. What's interesting here is there has been a rise up to a 12-month rolling average of $1 billion US. And I think it's worth pointing out here that while that's a significant amount, bear in mind what I said earlier about the US importing $1 billion US every single month. Imports into the EU are the same over a period of 12 months. So it is a much smaller level of import, but it has been rising, and it was rising until the end of 2019 and was hit by the severe problems with COVID at the end of starting in March last year. African countries, yes, we've seen the volatility of imports from Cameroon, very, very volatile over the long term, and gradually declining over the long term. Very little sign of an uptick yet this year in terms of imports from Cameroon. Congo also has been volatile in terms of imports on a monthly and quarterly basis. But again, overall, though, the trade with Congo Republic has remained relatively stable, and slight signs of an uptick there. Ghana has also been quite stable, as has imports from Central African Republic, stable, but at a relatively low level. And then this is particularly important from the perspective of the competitiveness of FLEGT licensed products in the EU and UK markets. It's imports from countries which have not signed a VPA. Some of them have been negotiating a VPA, but on the whole, they have not signed a VPA. So if we look at the imports from those countries from the tropics, you can see that imports from Malaysia, yes, have been gradually sliding. They did rise a little bit in 2018, but since then have been sliding. Big change in Malaysian imports into the EU and UK has been a shift from sawnwood more towards furniture products. India, one of the most significant trends in imports of tropical wood products in the EU recently has been the consistent rise in imports of furniture from India. A trend which was only interrupted briefly by the COVID pandemic. There was a particularly steep decline in imports from India during the early lockdown period, but a very strong recovery has occurred since then. Imports from Brazil were rising strongly until the middle of 2019, but they have been sliding a little bit since then during the pandemic period, of course, very badly affected by the COVID pandemic in Brazil. Elsewhere, other important trends, yes, the large rise in imports of tropical hardwood plywood from China until the middle of 2019, only interrupted by the problems in the plywood market last year. Thailand generally declining as a supplier into the EU. Ivory Coast, similarly, a decline. But we can see here Myanmar there, not a large import in terms of volumes, but generally it was rising despite the recommendations of regarding legality due diligence from Myanmar. The imports from Myanmar were rising until the beginning of last year, and it still remain quite high even now. Imports from, and in fact, the elephant in the room really is the level of EU imports from countries not engaged in any form of VPA process that are outside the tropical regions. And if you just look at the level of trade with these countries, it dwarfs any imports from the tropics. The scale on the chart on the right hand side is a factor of 10 greater than the scale on the left-hand side. And here we see China, $6 billion imported from China every single year, a fairly consistent figure during the last, between 2015 and 2019. There was a dip certainly at the beginning of last year, but again, a very strong rebound in UK and EU imports from China at the beginning of this year. Similarly with Russia, imports from Russia, Ukraine and Belarus, the imports again, they were slowing a little bit in 2019 due particularly to the problems with in the plywood sector, and the wider manufacturing sector in the UK and EU was declining during that period. But there has been again a rebound since the middle of 2020, and imports seem to be rising quite strongly from the CIS region into the UK, into the EU and UK. So I don't plan to, I haven't got a lot of time, so I won't go through all these key trade trends. They basically reiterate what I said earlier. I think I will just emphasize to close my presentation the last point, that the FLEGT timber legality assurance systems and the trade due diligence measures, we've seen in the global trade flow trends that they have significant and rising global coverage. And I think it's very important to build on this. And in the EU and UK market, particularly important to build on the preliminary signs of an upturn in imports from tropical countries, from FLEGT licensed countries, driven particularly by Indonesia in 2018 and 2019. So we do need to focus very strongly on marketing those products in the EU and UK markets, which I think is the theme of the next presentation. So thank you very much. I'll hand over at that stage to Sarah. Thank you very much.
Hi, yes, thank you, Rupert. Just going back to the start of my presentation. Yes, what I'd like to share with you now is sort of the other pillar of IMM, research results from 4 years of IMM surveys and some key insights and recommendations. During the last 4 years, since 2017, when the IMM started working at full capacity, our correspondents in the EU and the UK have interviewed or have conducted interviews, more than 600 interviews with timber importers and traders. They are based on standardized templates and are used every year, so we can monitor changes over time. In addition to that, the correspondents interviewed around 80 furniture importers and traders in the EU. There were interviews with architects and finance and investment specialists for our dedicated studies in these areas. The correspondents also talk every year to competent authorities, associations, and monitoring organizations in the respective EU countries. And in 2018 and 19, we held a total of 5 trade consultations in our key EU countries with more than 200 participants in total who shared their views on FLEGT-related issues. So there's really a very sort of broad basis for these surveys, and while some of the things we've recorded are anecdotal evidence, there's really a sort of very broad basis for these anecdotes. We also, like I mentioned earlier, have correspondents in a couple of VPA partner countries, especially in Indonesia, of course, but also in Ghana and Vietnam. And these partners interview between 20 and 40 companies every year, and also associations, some CSOs and government agencies. But the focus of the IMM is really on the consumer side and the impacts there, because of course there are other projects dedicating to monitor impacts in the VPA partner countries. So in partner countries, our questions focus more on trade supply side issues. For example, if the TILAS implementation is having any impacts on raw material availability, or the application process for FLEGT licensing, if there are any impacts on trade, like delays and things like that. Otherwise, the focus is very strongly on the consumer side. Of course, the key question is, are there any market advantages for FLEGT licensed timber due to this green lane status? So these are examples of questions we ask every year. We look into the awareness among the trade of the FLEGT VPA process. We ask companies that are using it in practice if the administrative processes are easily manageable, if FLEGT licenses are in fact in practice making importing wood from Indonesia easier, and also if companies give preference to FLEGT licensed timber over unlicensed timber. So if we start here on the top left, we can see that the awareness, at least among the operators, among the first places of timber on the EU market, is quite good now. There are only very few companies that still say they are completely unaware of the process. Unfortunately, if we go further down the supply chain, or also more in the furniture sector for the special studies, we found that awareness there is still significantly lower. However, on the positive side, if we come to the administrative processes, there's really a vast majority and consensus that these processes are straightforward and easily manageable. And also on the question whether they are making importing wood from Indonesia easier, there's quite a strong consensus that this is definitely the case. We can see here in 2017, there was some disagreement. However, that was very quickly resolved in practically all the key countries that we are monitoring, with one slight exception, especially in 2020. I'm going to say a bit more about that later. And also, there is a tendency to definitely give preference to FLEGT licensed timber from Indonesia over unlicensed timber from competing sources. Although when we are having a conversation with traders about this, there are usually some qualifications to this. Of course, commercial criteria are considered first and foremost, like the price, the quality, consistent availability of the product, shipments, and things like that. But where product criteria are comparable or equal, the FLEGT license can definitely give a competitive advantage in the decision making. What we were also trying to find out, we started including this question in 2018, was if there was a direct perceived impact of the EUTR and of the market introduction of FLEGT licensed timber on companies' import share of tropical timber in their product mix. Well, there were some pretty clear answers on the EUTR here, where between 24 and 38 of respondents, depending on the year, said that there was a small or even a big decrease in the share of tropical timber due to the EUTR, although quite remarkable is that in 2014 this share has declined, in 2020, sorry, has declined quite significantly to 24%. Which might indicate that companies in all the key countries have now completely concluded their sort of post-due diligence cleanup of supply chains. It might also indicate that actually there is some reputational improvement of tropical timber due to the fact that the EUTR is in place now, that it can be considered legal. That is feedback we had from some importers who said in 2020 especially, actually that there was a small increase again in tropical timber due to these reputational advantages provided by EUTR implementation. But in general, the feedback was that the EUTR has tended to narrow the supply base in tropical countries, both in terms of the product scope and in terms of the number of suppliers people worked with. Another quite general response was that the share of certified timber had increased in order to achieve EUTR compliance. This has created some difficulties as there's not always enough certified timber available in tropical countries, which sometimes led to then a substitution of tropical timber with temperate alternatives that were more readily available with certification. And when we come to FLEGT licensing, there's quite a positive message where every year some of the survey respondents, up to, well, close to 30%, reported at least a small increase in tropical timber in their product mix due to FLEGT licensing. What we've done over the last couple of weeks was going through all our reports and studies since 2017 and try to sort of condense the vast number of recommendations and concerns that were raised during our surveys and consultation. And we were really able to identify 3 focal areas around which they all centered, 2 of which are a lot more important than the third from our feeling. The first one is to ensure consistent and effective enforcement of the EU timber regulation throughout the European Union. A number of reasons and contexts were given for this recommendation. Of course, first of all, from the perspective of VPA partner countries, to create an immediate market advantage for FLEGT licensed timber throughout the EU, to create for the companies in the EU a level playing field, not just at national level, but at EU level. So far, quite a few respondents in our key countries felt that the EUTR had leveled the playing field at the national level, where a lot of companies, even before the EUTR, had been part of responsible purchasing schemes developed by associations, for example, and they felt that their competitors who had not had such schemes pre-EUTR had now been compelled to also do that. But while they felt the competition was fair at national level now, there's still quite a lot of negative feeling as to whether this is really the fact at an EU level. This is also important for the third point, to address environmental prejudice. It is important that it is known that the EUTR is consistently and effectively implemented and enforced, and of course to prevent illegal timber from entering or circulating on the EU market. The second focal area, similarly important, was found that there is at the moment still a lack of endorsement and promotion of FLEGT licensed timber, especially also on the part of the European Commission and member states. It's sort of felt to be something that is owned by no one and really promoted and pushed by no one. Points that were raised as possible areas of improvement were to accept licenses sort of on equal level with certification in public procurement. So while acknowledging that, of course, certification and FLEGT licensing are not the same thing, they are completely different concepts. They each have their individual advantages and disadvantages and should have a similar level, the same level of recognition. This goes hand in hand with clarifying the sort of status of FLEGT licensing. Where does it sit in this legality, sustainability hierarchy? Again, measures to raise awareness, also further down to supply chain, and to have these messages delivered by relevant, credible stakeholders. A recommendation that came out of our finance studies was to give preferential treatment for FLEGT licensed timber in all sorts of green finance initiatives, and again to find measures to address the still existing and lingering environmental prejudice against tropical timber in general, seeing as all VPA partner countries are currently tropical countries. The third pillar, minimizing bureaucracy involved in importing FLEGT licensed timber. I already indicated that we no longer consider this so important, because the feedback from the vast majority of our respondents was that these things are working well. There are no significant delays in importing licensed timber. Still, implementing e-licensing was something that has been repeatedly raised. This seems to be well underway with Indonesia now. So this might be resolved soon. Another point, dropping fees for processing FLEGT licenses. Feedback from our surveys is that these fees that are raised by some countries are not really hurting much financially because of their size, but they don't really send a very good signal for something that's supposed to have preferential treatment in the market. And the third point is the handling of FLEGT license mismatches, especially the fact that in Indonesia they tend to use different HS codes for certain products than in Europe. I mean, this is something that has come up in 2017 when FLEGT licenses first appeared on the market. This is nothing fraudulent, it's just different applications and uses. And from the feedback we are having, this is handled pretty well now in practically all the key EU countries, not leading to major delays anymore. An exception here was Belgium, where last year there were quite a few reports of shipments being held up at port for a long period of time due to such mismatches. And this has had an impact even on our survey questions in this area, where the perception of the administrative processes and also the release for circulation, the time for release for circulation was much more negative in Belgium than on average in the other countries. So, I mean, addressing something like that in an unbureaucratic manner would be good, especially in a country like Belgium. That's an important point of entry and also a very important market for Indonesia. Just a few more details on a couple of these constraints and problems that come really out of these recommendations that are the other side of the recommendations. Legality versus sustainability has, I think, recently gained even more importance when the EU or the EC released some first insights into the results of this fitness check and really said they wanted to move on to sustainability. This is a point that has been raised in our surveys as well, that European governments and companies have moved on from legality to sustainability. The level of awareness, as we can see in the chart here, of the wider benefits of VPA implementation is still too low. The perception among the trade is still mixed. So the contributions towards sustainability of these VPAs should be better communicated. And then another point that was frequently raised was, in practice in European procurement, there is a very simplified definition being used of sustainability, which typically is that simply certification, FSC or PFC is being specified in such cases. We've done a more detailed analysis of this in 2019 and again earlier this year, looking at public procurement policies across the EU and in the UK. In our last paper this year, we included 31 policies that had relevance to timber products. So in some countries, there's more than one. And out of these 31, we found that 21 do accept FLEGT licenses in some capacity. However, the way FLEGT licenses are accepted varies very strongly, depending also on how the policies are phrased, whether they just use the terms legal and sustainable without clearly defining them. Then some policies have detailed set of criteria for legal and sustainable. And then there are some, well, there's just one policy in Germany that explicitly accepts only certain certification systems, FSC and PFC, or equivalent, which is not more clearly defined. So our 2021 paper identified 3 different scenarios when it comes to acceptance of FLEGT licensed timber. The most favorable one is to accept it at an equal level with certification. There's only the UK and Luxembourg among the countries we monitored that are doing this at the moment. The second would be to accept FLEGT licensed timber as second best to certified. There are a number of countries that are doing this, that are also using sort of the term sustainability in this context, but without defining what sustainability means. And then the third point is to accept FLEGT licensed timber as explicitly as legal timber or as acceptable timber. There are a number of companies that explicitly do that. But overall, in most policies, there is no real formal status granted to FLEGT licensed timber, even if it is mentioned. So in practice, this means that FLEGT licensed timber is not specified in public project in most or all member states, and also that there is little positive leadership effect that would create trust and would encourage others to include and promote FLEGT licensed timber. And this goes a bit hand in hand with the last point, the environmental prejudice and inconsistent messaging, the lack of active promotion. Survey respondents in all our key countries have flagged up difficulties in maintaining and developing market share for tropical timber due to environmental prejudice. So what IMM has done was to commission a study in 2019 of EU wood promotion campaigns and also of timber trade federations' attitudes and sort of activities in the area of FLEGT licensed timber. This study identified 17 campaigns, important campaigns, 13 of which were found to have potential scope to promote FLEGT licensing. Of these 13, 5 campaigns made a positive reference to FLEGT licensing, but there was no active promotion that we could identify. Among the 2 sort of specifically dedicated tropical timber programs or campaigns, the SCTC and Fair and Precious of the ATIBT, the study also found that the primary focus was on certified timber, although the SCTC is usually addressing the FLEGT VPA program at its annual conferences, and it also counts FLEGT licensed timber as evidence of responsible sourcing in its annual reports on the market share of verified sustainable timber in Europe. Now, the federations were found to have a key role as market influencers and communicators for the industry. So the IMM study looked into the positions of 8 important federations in key EU countries. The positions that we identified were again on a very broad scale, starting by one federation that promotes FLEGT very actively as operating at a scale necessary for sustainability. There are 1 or 2 others that do mention possible sustainability aspects in addition to the legality aspect and the EUTR compliance advantage. The EUTR compliance advantage is something that all federations are communicating to their members, although some are doing it again with a certain amount of caution, as there seem to be reservations that FLEGT licenses might gain a market share from certification. Moving on to dedicated, real specific promotion of VPAs and FLEGT licensed timber, we weren't able to identify too much to date. And interestingly, it's all very much centered on the UK, so now outside the EU. The one federation that very actively promotes FLEGT licensed timber is the UK Timber Trade Federation, with a number of activities. I'm not going to go into that because our next speaker, David Hopkins, the Managing Director of the Timber Trade Federation, will explain all this in detail. Besides the work of the Timber Trade Federation, which involves design competitions, exhibitions, and information on websites, there has been a domestic and international promotion and communication strategy developed for Indonesian FLEGT licensed timber under the MFP4 program in cooperation with the Global Timber Forum. These strategies are now being rolled out by an Indonesian and a European company simultaneously, and there has been some preparatory work that we are aware of communications in Ghana for promoting future FLEGT licensed timber from Ghana. But in order to learn more especially about these activities in Europe, I'm now handing over the microphone to David Hopkins from the UK Timber Trade Federation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Sorry to be a bit dim. Have you got the slides there, or do you want me to share the screen from here?
Oh, if you can, please share the screen.
Yeah, okay. 1 second. Okay. Let me just... Okay, can you see that?
Yes, looks good.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, as Sarah has said, we at the TTF have been very actively involved in promoting FLEGT, and specifically the FLEGT Action Plan and the concept of governance and legal frameworks and legal reform as the basis for all other positive developments in the forests, and whether those are towards certification, whether they're towards carbon markets, whether they're towards any other policy objective. We're promoting the concept of governance and legal reform. I think people don't appreciate quite how important that is in a wide range of policy frameworks and the benefits that brings. I also don't think that talking in very simplistic terms about whether something is legal, this is sustainable, is a meaningful conversation. And that what we want to do in the promotion is to have a much deeper conversation about all of the different aspects involved and make sure that somebody's idea of perfection does not prevent you making positive steps towards something that is good. So if we look through, we promote the whole FLEGT action plan. We promote it as a way to improve conditions in the forest, for the forests themselves, for the people who are dependent upon it, and improve conditions throughout the tropical supply chain. We promote it as a legal and verified way to import and to specify tropical timber and to get those tropical species into procurement policies, into designs, and work with designers, architects, and others to achieve that. We've got, although, as Sarah said, rather unfortunately for people like me, we are outside now of the EU. We do try to make this a pan-European communications campaign and a communications drive. And we want to work with partners in lots of different countries across Europe and across the world, in fact. And we aim to raise that market profile of the FLEGT initiative and awareness of the wider impacts of happening within countries that are going through VPA processes or have signed VPA agreements with the EU and the UK. We do, I mean, the UK, just to be clear, the UK has signed an agreement that it will honour and it will mirror all of the VPA agreements that have been signed. It will mirror the one so that we can accept FLEGT licenses from Indonesia. Any other country that completes, if you like, on its VPA agreement and starts to issue FLEGT licenses, the UK will also accept them and accept them in exactly the same terms as they were always intended. We use the whole communications campaign, as a vehicle to really raise awareness about governance as a whole, issues around certification, sustainability issues more generally within global forests. I think a lot of us who work very closely with the concepts of forests, the timber trade and everything else, can sometimes forget that to your audience, to the general public, there's very little difference between a forest in Sweden and a forest in Gabon or a forest in the Congo. They're all trees, they're all timber, they're all forests. And by having these promotion campaigns, particularly focused on the tropical area, it allows us to start those conversations, to run webinars, seminars, engagement events, and a whole range of other activities to really engage that audience in the whole debate. And we do get questions when we run seminars and things here, all about tropical timber. You still get questions about timber from Sweden, from Germany, from Austria, or wherever. And we have to put this in context. Our basic stance on all of this activity is that when we look at Europe, by and large, the forests and the timber trade is very well governed. It's very well regulated. The forests are growing. Now, you can have debates about the minutiae within those forests, but by and large, the forests are growing and they're well managed. And the economic output is increasing from those industries within the forests because they are well managed and well regulated. In the US, by and large, if you look at something like the hardwood forests in the States, they are very well regulated, well managed, and they are growing. That same story can be true in the tropical belt if we can get the governance and the regulatory approach right. Now, you can start to argue about the detail, but for a communications campaign to the general public, those general principles are absolutely key, and we want to make sure that we keep pushing them as a responsible industry, a responsible organisation, and responsibility for our membership and for the products that they trade in. In terms of what we've been doing and the projects that we've been looking at, we're really looking at 9 different sort of project areas and 9 different countries. So it's the UK, Europe, Indonesia, Ghana, China, Vietnam, Gabon, and then we're doing a lot of work now around COP26, the role of the timber trade, the role of forestry, the role of forest products, and particularly within that, and something I'll talk about towards the end, is the role of governance. And I said that that is absolutely key. I think that there's a whole load of related policies which sometimes look a lot more attractive, a lot more sexy than FLEGT, but actually the governance is the thing that will underpin those and really be the sort of the basis on which they succeed or fail. And I'm talking about things like RED, RED+, all of those sorts of initiatives. If there is no legal governance, no legal framework in place to govern the activities around that forest and the land use within a country, who's going to put money into a carbon project that may or may not exist in 15, 20 years, whatever? So what do we do? How do we do these projects? We work with retailers, importers, end users to really educate them about the benefits of specifying FLEGT licensed goods and hope to include those within their procurement policies. We talk them through what exactly is involved in the VPA agreements, the changes that are happening on the ground. We use stories from within the different countries that have signed VPA agreements and work with the trade associations, the timber trade associations within those countries to get those stories out, to tell a positive story of change and reform. We try and enhance the communications to promote FLEGT to specifiers and producers around the world. I think that there's a really good knock-on effect when you are promoting the changes that are happening in different tropical countries to specifiers and end users in the UK. It actually acts as a real boost to producers within the tropical countries themselves to try and produce more, certainly more marketing material, certainly more communications from their own end about the positive things that are happening on their side. We develop a lot of materials and documents and training materials for trade associations about FLEGT and about responsible sourcing and about due diligence. We've developed some e-learning modules. These are online learning for trade associations and for individual companies that we can use within your business about the FLEGT process, about sustainable forest management, about timber legality, about sustainability, and about supply chain management. And we really want to change the profile and the perception of tropical hardwoods and promote the values about the FLEGT process, the VPA process has into widely accessed media. We try and put a lot of it online so that people can read it around the world and people can pick up on these, the stories and the promotions that we're doing. In terms of things that we do, trying to talk to any audience and trying to get them excited about a concept of legality or about a concept of certification is really boring and it will not win over your audience. People do respond to good design. They respond to well-crafted objects and installations, and they respond to them at a different level than they will about words on a screen or concepts of legality or a piece of paper. And so we always try and start with objects and installations and things that have been made out of wood, and then work our way backwards to the concepts of sustainability, using these objects as a means to tell the story about the forest that they've come from, the process that they've gone through, the changes that have happened in that supply chain, and the changes that have happened over time. We publish a whole series of articles and blogs. We're very active on social media, things that will pick up a global audience, things that designers and architects can pick up on very easily to promote these positive stories, to promote a wider knowledge and acceptance of the FLEGT as a very safe and legal and responsible method of using tropical timber species from VPA countries, and as a means of improving governance and trade and transparency. Our work is featured in TRADA, which is a company which is the Timber Research and Development Association. It's one of the main vehicles through which we communicate with architects and developers, and the Timber Trade Federation has just merged with TRADA, so we're forming a much bigger organisation to be able to do this communication. We do it through the Building Centre, which is a hub for architects and designers, through the IMM, the Timber Trades Journal, Design, which is an online design magazine read throughout the world, the Architects Journal, Architecture Today, the Royal Institute of British Architects, Furniture and Joinery magazines, and lots more. All of the publications and the online sites that will attract the key audience of architects and designers. If you look at some of the stuff that's come out, you'll see that there's a lot of it. We ran a design competition, conversations about climate change, and we challenged designers to design and make a conversation piece, something that would stimulate a conversation about climate change and the role of forests within that debate. And we wanted to, originally I'd thought of it in terms of furniture design, and I thought that people would have chairs or tables where you could sit and physically have a conversation. What actually came back was incredible. You can see all of the designs that are actually exhibited downstairs in our building here. But the things that people came back with all had to be made from timbers originating from one of the VPA countries, one or more of the VPA countries. We had to source them then through our members and talk about the process that goes through in terms of due diligence, supply chain management, and sort of legal verification of documentation throughout. We talked about the fact that most of the products that came back were actually certified, FSC certified products. And we talked about that and what a shame that was, that you had to rely on that you couldn't have a legal framework already, a sort of a framework in most countries that was already operating. And that, you know, the certification came because you couldn't trust the public sector frameworks that exist currently in countries around the world, and so on. And so it was a huge exercise in stimulating your audience into the debates around timber. It led us then to be able to place lots of articles in magazines. It provided a very kind of visual hook to grab hold of your audience and drag them into this debate and force them to have the conversation and make that part of their design. And the things that came back when we were thinking about furniture, you can see there's a model of a chimpanzee, and we had a chimpanzee, a gorilla, an elephant, and other animals that you might find in the forests, all made from tropical timbers from different countries. There was a piece made from teak from Ghana, which was really looking at this concept of rising sea levels and what might happen, and the fact that the way that you measure water depth and so on for high tide marks, which is a very inventive piece. There was a piece of lots of different species cut into shapes to look like gold bullion, and on each piece it had the amount of carbon that was stored within that piece of wood, and those were piled up to look like gold bullion to kind of signify the carbon markets and the wealth of these forests, and the fact that actually if carbon has a value, then these forests have an incredible value, and so on. And all the way through, getting people to talk about the fact that without legal frameworks, governance frameworks, trading frameworks that make this possible, then the money will not return to the forests, the management will deteriorate, and so on. So It's been a hugely sort of positive and fun exercise, and it's a good way to stimulate your audience for all of the other timbers that you might want them to use as well. So in terms of events and other things, we've got very close working relationships with global partners, ourselves included, and a number of other partners are grant funded by the UK government through what was the Department for International Development and is now the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. And so that provides a very good network of people and organisations with whom we can work. We work with embassies around the world, the British embassies and partner country embassies within London, with trade bodies in all of the VPA countries, but also with all of our partners across the EU, in the States and other places, with NGOs. We've got far better relations now with retailers who will sell furniture and other objects outside of the membership just of the Timber Trade Federation, but it may be our own members, customers who are part of the retailers groups, or other end user groups. So, architects associations, furniture makers associations, all of these different end user groups that will specify timber across the supply chain. And we run a lot of events to bring audiences in and promote sustainable tropical timber. So we had a UK market webinar in collaboration with the Indonesian Embassy in September last year that we took part in. We run our own sort of conference and market update webinars. So we did one on tropical timber in November last year. We do one every year. We'll be doing one again this year. We did a lot of online work with Design, this big magazine, online design and architecture and furniture design, interior design magazine that we did a lot of work with to stimulate the conversations. We take part with IMM in all of their work, all of your work, I should say, Sarah and Rupert and others. This week, we've been taking part in the Forest Legality Week for the World Resources Institute, the WRI, and chaired a session yesterday about the pandemic and the timber trade, and working also with another group called Cities for Forests, and they've got a project called Sustainable Wood for Cities. It's an ongoing project, and we work with them to help promote that and hopefully get some stuff going in London and in Glasgow for the COP. Is my button working? There we go. So conversations about climate change. If you look here, there's some of the objects that I've already talked about. We try and make the point that if you're specifying tropical timber, if you're doing this properly, Sarah showed some slides earlier about perception, about the European audiences, Western audiences in general, turning away from tropical timber because they think it's bad. Now, it's a strange thing about perception amongst consumer audiences. Nobody thinks that eating a chocolate bar is bad, despite the fact that a lot of the ingredients will come from tropical countries. People are very happy to tweet on their phone, despite the fact that most of the minerals and metals that are used to power this come from some questionable sources in tropical countries and can cause all manner of issues, and so on, and all of that. But timber obviously has a very immediate link with tropical forests in people's minds. People are turned away from it. We've been saying all along, actually done properly, you can play a role in the climate change battle. You can play a role in keeping those forests standing, and you can play a role in making sure that the people within those forests have an income that helps them then towards the sustainable forest management within their own countries. We've got these exhibitions, these installations as part of the exhibition. On the top left there is the gold bullion stacks that I said. In the middle, there's a piece called Extraction, and the artist was very keen to demonstrate that he's drilled all these holes in a very big piece of Iroko. And the idea is if you drill one more hole, the entire system will collapse. And it was really talking about illegal deforestation. And there's a whole range of information next to each one of these installations, linking it back to the need for legal frameworks, the need for governance, the need for reform, and injections of money and governmental reform within tropical countries. You can look online at the buildingcentre.co.uk, and you can go through and have a look through and play around. You can see all the photos, you'll see video content, you'll see each one of the objects, the installations that are part of this, and you can go through all of the information that we've put up there. In addition to this, we are about to, and I'd really like to get the whole IMM audience involved in this. We're doing a number of things for the climate change talks, which will be in the UK this year. We're still unsure if people will be allowed to go to Glasgow due to the ongoing effects of COVID and the pandemic around the world. This is a global conference, and if the whole globe has not been vaccinated, we don't know if people will be allowed to travel or what will go on. So we've got several plans in place. We have a submission to go up to Glasgow and launch a manifesto, but also we're going to be running for 6 weeks a timber festival, the title of which we're kicking around at the moment, World of Wood, Global Forests, whatever it's going to be called. A theme within it is the fact that global forests need global governance. I would like to launch a manifesto at the climate change talks, and I think we've taken on the responsibility of trying to organise this with partners around the world, because the climate change talks are happening in this country. So we feel it's incumbent upon us to help develop things in partnership with others that we can launch to really say this is a moment in time. The climate change talks are happening. Everybody recognises that forests are absolutely crucial. We've seen everybody talk about nature-based solutions, nature-based supply chains, the bioeconomy, all these sorts of concepts which are really coming to the fore in the COP26 build-up. But without a proper system of governance, you will never tackle the issues of deforestation. And we want to say now is the time to really inject more energy and more money and more political goodwill into the debate around governance and forest management, and particularly for the supply chains of forest products coming out of high-risk forests in particular. So we're planning to use this 6-week exhibition as a platform to highlight all of these things. We're going to be doing stuff about European timbers as well, about building with wood and the role of building with wood and carbon capture and storage and low carbon building. But in particular, we will be launching a series of events and a series of actions, along with an exhibition about global forests and global governance at the Building Centre for 6 weeks. We hope to be doing it digitally in Glasgow. We've got a bit of an option to take a bit of a space within the COP talks. And I think that we would have to replicate what we do in London as a digital offering in Glasgow. But that's what we want to do. Please put it in your diaries. Please make sure that you can travel to this small island off the coast of Europe and come and visit the exhibition. I think we can actually get a lot of support for re-energizing this process. I saw the point, and I'm sure that there'll be questions about the EU fitness test for FLEGT. I think that we can use this as an opportunity to really raise awareness of the benefits there. I think that when they look at their fitness tests, the EU should really recognise they have not done enough to push this concept forward. I don't think any of us could name an individual or a department that is responsible or has a target for developing this policy framework, which is a great shame. And I think that when you look at the fitness check, if they're going to be critical, it needs to actually hold up a mirror to the people who hold that policy and perhaps say, you haven't done enough to make this work properly. So we want to do that, and we want to get you all involved. And I hope that we will see you all there very soon. Oh, sorry, I thought that was my last slide. We do have, we'll send these slides around. I'm sure Sarah will circulate them. We've got online education facilities, which I think are available for free online. It gives a good insight into the work we've been doing. It gives it's an education training resource, and there's an assessment at the end to check that you understand all of the main themes within the FLEGT process, within the use of tropical timber. It gives a good connection between FLEGT and certification. We don't ignore certification. We've been accused of that in the past, but we do, you know, we acknowledge the sort of pioneering role that that's played and continues to play in the timber trade. So if you want to keep up to date with any of these activities and things that we're doing, these are all the different online places you can get hold of us, and you can follow the communications that my colleague Lucy puts out to the world, and you can see a lot of the different objects that come up in the exhibitions, in the design competitions, all of that sort of stuff. And that, why do we do it? The strapline for the Timber Trade Federation is this. This is our slogan about timber you can trust. And that is our, we see all of the activities that we do in promoting FLEGT, in promoting supply chain management, due diligence, and other things as really feeding in to that central concept for the Timber Trade Federation. So thank you very much. I will just come out. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. That was very interesting and inspiring. I'm glad that also Steve Johnson has joined us now, the officer in charge at the ITTO, who's also responsible at ITTO for our project. And Steve, I would like to hand over to you now to run the Q&A session. We have a lot of questions. I'm seeing 18 down here. Also, if any of the participants wishes to make a direct intervention, please raise your hands, and if time allows, we will of course let you contribute directly to this. Steve, do you want to continue?
Yeah, sure, Sarah. Well, thanks a lot. Thanks to you and all the other speakers too. Very stimulating discussion, and it's good to see what the UK and some others are doing to push FLEGT forward. I mean, certainly from our perspective in ITTO, many of the member countries in ITTO and of the team working on this IMM project, one of the big, I'm not sure if we can call it a disappointment, but a bit of a surprise is the fact that most of the effort and certainly most of the news that you hear about FLEGT is on keeping the bad wood out and not so much about promoting the good wood that is coming in from Indonesia and also from some of the other countries that have signed VPAs that have made huge efforts. They might not be licensed yet, but they put a huge amount of work into it. So I think we need to start tilting the balance away from focusing on the bad wood to focusing a bit on the good wood too. So of course the newspapers don't like good news too much, so we have to deal with that. But I think it's our job as ones who know about this to try to push some of the good stories and to try to let people know the hard work that the countries have been doing to put in place governance systems and legality systems. Anyway, I don't want to talk long. As Sarah said, we have a number of people that have submitted questions in writing. I think we have about a half an hour time-wise till the end of the time at 7, well, my time at 7 p.m. I don't know what time it is your time, but half an hour anyway to go. And my idea is I'm going to read through these questions and direct them to who I think might be able to take a stab at answering them on the panel. But if any of the other panelists want to take a crack, just jump in. So starting from the top of the list, we had one from, and I'll read the person's name. I apologize if I mispronounce it, from Adalbert Ludwig Laze. He said, European final consumers often think it's bad to consume tropical hardwoods. Do you think this can be changed over the next years? If not, how might it be changed the reputation of tropical woods toward a better one? Well, I think I just started to answer that a little bit, but Sarah, do you want to take a crack at that one? Or Dave? I mean, Dave,
yeah,
you were
no, I'm happy to pick that up. I think perception can be changed, but it does. It's quite a lot of work involved in really engaging that audience and talking them through. And I think that it's almost incumbent upon everyone who sells tropical timber, whether that tropical timber comes out as a piece of furniture or an item, just a piece of wood to be processed by somebody else or whatever. There has to be a story with it. And the beauty of having something like a FLEGT license or even, certification system, some kind of marker, it acts as a prompt for you to tell a story about where your product has come from, what's been involved, the benefits it brings, and so on. And I think if you look at some of the communications that come out of companies like Interholco, they're absolutely fantastic and they're doing a great job. But that has to sort of move all the way along the supply chain. And we need to develop the tools for each point on the supply chain to be able to tell these stories and push that into the market. And it is a long slog. We're doing our bit in London, but it needs to be done everywhere. And that it's a big responsibility on people to do it.
Yeah, completely agree, Dave. And the fact is, we're also dealing with many years of almost exclusively negative information, as I was saying, getting into people's heads about tropical forests. Some of it, much of it justified. I mean, but the fact is it's not easy to find good information. And as you said, we all need to work to get it out there. So I'm going to keep rolling along here because we have quite a few. There's a couple here for Rupert now. I assume everybody can read the questions, but I'll just summarize. The first one is from Hugh Speechley. Hi, Hugh. Where's the raw material supplying India's increased exports coming from? I think I know where some of it's coming from, but I'll let Rupert. Okay. Hyunju, do you want to answer that, or Rupert? I mean, one of you needs to answer it.
Well, this is India rather than Indonesia, yes?
India, yeah.
Well, we did the IMM did a furniture study recently where it did look at, it's mainly furniture and we understand it's mainly plantation grown, a lot of it from farmland. It's mango, a lot of it's mango wood and some local natural forest species. But yes, I mean, that's a big issue for us. We don't know exactly. What we don't know is how they're demonstrating legality for that particular product in a way that is comparable to the Indonesians. So there is a mismatch there.
Great, Rupert. And now a couple questions from James Hewitt. In terms of the statistics you presented, Rupert, how different would the picture be if instead of values, we were looking at weights or volumes? I mean, in some of the statistics you did present in weight because that's all that's available for stuff like pulp and paper. But do you want to say something about that before I keep going on the rest of the question?
No, that's fine. I think James probably knows his answer as well as anybody. So it's it's a loaded question. Of course, it would be very different if we were looking at at volume data. We obviously use the value data, partly because IMM is particularly interested in the economic implications of licensing. It's partly a practical thing because it's difficult to generate data at a global level which is comparable using volume data. It's very difficult to separate out. I think his next question is about plantations and natural forests, separating out the data for those two product groups. And it is extremely difficult using the trade data that we have to separate those two types of wood. It simply isn't really up to the task. So yes, certainly we know that the COVID impact on volumes would have been considerable. The volume of exports has declined from a lot of countries, whereas the value at the same time has been rising because the prices are rising. I mean, we hear of reports in the States, for example, of lumber being sort of 3 times the value it was only 3 years ago as a result of the shortages due to COVID. So yes, it would paint a very different picture. And yet, at the same time, it's difficult at this stage, at short notice, to provide details of that picture. We will, in due course, try to do that.
Yeah, and I mean, part of the question is also asking about the implication of more wood coming from plantations than from natural forests, and if that's consistent with the purposes of the FLEGT action plan and ITTO. Well, I'm not going to speak for the FLEGT action plan, but at least on ITTO's side, the ITTO has a long-standing program of promoting tropical plantation development as a way of helping countries to relieve pressure on the natural forest and still maintain incomes and hopefully be able to conserve more of the natural forest, which is where the biodiversity is. So for us, there's no conflict. I mean, we are happy to see it. What we do wish, and which I think everybody wish, including James and us, is that countries would be able to give a bit more distinction in their production statistics, if they provide production statistics at all, which many of them don't, on the distinction between plantations and natural forest production. But certainly plantations are playing an increasing role everywhere, especially in some of the countries that were mentioned in the question. So, okay, I'm going to keep going. Mike Jeffries asked one, has there been any feedback on the IMM survey findings that the EU, much of the trade feels that the FLEGT VPAs aren't being sufficiently promoted? Sarah, I'm going to give that one to you.
Yes, I mean, it's rather difficult to say. I think the main thing that kept coming up, that it was answered with the question, who's responsible for promoting it, which is, again, this issue of the ownership of the process. I know there have been discussions within the EC about creating a FLEGT brand. They've also consulted us on this, but this seems to have been, we haven't had any feedback on this anymore in the last 12 months. Let me put it like that. I don't know if you want to elaborate more, or if Dave has had any experience.
Yeah, no, we haven't had much feedback, and it is a bit difficult for us now, being a pariah country and sitting outside of the EU, to be talking about this policy. But I mean, the UK has always been very involved in it, and fully intends to continue being involved. I think one of the problems here, the EU needs to look at itself with who owns the policy, who is responsible for implementing it, and so on. And if just on a very basic management level, if you want something to work, you need a name and a face to it. So a name of an organization that is going to do something, and a face of a person that will be responsible for making sure that that stuff happens. So if the IT goes wrong in your company, you go to the IT person or the IT department and you say, why isn't this working? Or can you make it work? And can you make it, you know, the best IT system? In government, if people are suffering ill health, you go to the Department of Health and you go to your Minister for Health and you question them. When you look at the sort of forestry policies, they are dispersed amongst a million different groups and lots of different people. Not one person and not one department really takes responsibility for owning it and making it work. They went through a hell of a process to really get the FLEGT action plan up, into existence, and then almost walked away from it. And I think that the EU kind of has a responsibility now to look at that, either to say we can't do this on our own, or either step up to the plate, kind of redesign it like that, or to admit that actually, as we've seen, the EU isn't the principal driver for trade in tropical products, and you may need to involve a kind of an international secretariat to get that working. China, get the tropical producer countries themselves around the table to start making this whole thing work. And I do think it's key, and I do think it's incumbent upon the trade to make the point that it is a really positive policy framework. It's possibly in the wrong place, and it doesn't have anybody trying to sort of push it forward to make it work.
Completely agree, Dave. And I think that it's going to remain the primary responsibility of the trade to promote this policy, fortunately or unfortunately, at least in the near future, because right now there's a lot of uncertainty about, at least from the European Union side, from the Commission side, about where exactly the FLEGT action plan and the EUTR is going. You referred to the fitness check of the EUTR in your presentation. So we, of course, IMM is very concerned with that, the project, because we need to know what will happen to the VPA countries. I mean, will those VPAs still exist under some new legislation that's being proposed? So there's a lot of uncertainty right now, and I think that in terms of promoting FLEGT and promoting licensed timber, that probably, at least on the Commission's mind, and I'm not sure about the EU countries, they have to speak for themselves, but at least the feedback we get is that's probably not the top priority right now. I think the top priority right now is to sort out where they're going with this, and then maybe they turn to that later. So, okay, then we have a few more questions. We have one from Akiko Inoguchi. How do we interpret that there's been no visible dip in the volume of timber export before as the FLEGT implementation or licensing? Rupert, do you want to see if you can answer that one? I'm not quite sure if I get the exact thrust of the question. Do you know where it's going there?
There's no decrease in exports from Indonesia with licensing? Is that the question?
I think that's the gist of the question. I mean, in fact,
I'm not sure the rationale why. Why would there necessarily? I wouldn't expect there to be necessarily any dip because of FLEGT licensing in exports from Indonesia, for the simple reason, obviously, they were evolving SVLK over a long period. The licensing was the very final step in the process, where they had, over the previous decade in Indonesia, been working on reform of the whole forest sector, on removing illegal wood from the trade. It was only right at the end that the licensing system was implemented, was introduced after a lot of reviews by the EU and the Joint Implementation Committee in Indonesia. So the actual timing at the point of the implementation of licensing, I would not expect to see any decline in exports. In fact, I would be hoping to see a rise in exports as a result of the increased confidence in the products coming out of Indonesia.
I think Akiko has just raised her hand. Maybe she would like to frame
I think the question was accurately interpreted. I'm not sure if it's a question to Rupert or any of the other FLEGT process experts, but yeah, my assumption was, okay, Rupert's explained for the context of Indonesia, but for many other countries that are going through the VPA implementation stages, I think that what they're going through is not necessarily it's a reform, and implementation does happen with time, but not necessarily in such long time that they can start to grow a host of new plantations that are legal. So my anticipation was that when FLEGT and the BPA and the licensing all start to happen, there would be a natural dip that would exclude the illegal timber. And then it would start to go up. Obviously, it would be ideal not to have this dip, but I also thought it was rather unnatural that there would be no dip at all. Not just Indonesia, but also the implementing countries.
Rupert?
Yeah. Oh, well, okay. I mean, obviously the big one at the moment in terms of volume and value is Vietnam. There's been no dip there, partly because they actually planted their areas of plantations some time ago, and actually those plantations are now maturing. It might also be indicative in places like Vietnam. You know, there was a large legal supply from those plantations for some time already in existence. Certainly, we also have to bear in mind in some of the African countries, Cameroon, for example, they haven't really progressed far down the actual implementation route. So the actual impact of the reform process and the progress towards licensing hasn't really impacted on the availability of timber from that country. Much more relevant from that country, for example, has been, well, the declining availability of natural forest hardwoods in Cameroon, the lack of access to those hardwoods, the decline in availability of those products which are more commercially accessible. They've obviously declined in exports to Europe, but there has been a very large, and there's the other issue, of course, there has been a very large diversion of trade to China, particularly, and to other emerging markets. That has coincided with the period of implementation in Africa. Yeah,
that's really important, Rupert, because that's what I was going to say, is that even, you know, first of all, I'm not sure that I agree with the idea that there should be a dip when they start licensing because the illegal will be excluded. Presumably by getting licensed, they've already excluded the illegal. But what has happened in the EU, there's no doubt about it, what has happened in the EU is that tropical timber's share of the EU market has gone down through the floor. I mean, what Rupert showed on some of his slides was the 10-to-1 ratio of imports from non-tropical places like China, you know, and basically, you know, even though a country like Indonesia has managed to eke out a few increases over the last few years, the other countries like the US and China, etc., and even India have increased much more. So basically, the proportion of the EU market that's taken by these VPA countries is declining. Is that right, Rupert? I mean, I believe that that's the case, that all of our reports.
Yeah, well, Indonesia has increased, but of course, you look at the figures, and the one which is of particular interest to us is that Brazil, the exports from Brazil increased quite sharply into the EU up until the middle of 2019. And that's, you know, that is some direct competitors with Indonesian wood, and we're not entirely sure how they're getting the due diligence assurances for Brazilian wood. I do know a lot of the traders have invested very heavily in very comprehensive, detailed systems, but I'm not sure that can cover that entire volume from Brazil during this period of EUTR. So that is a concern, absolutely, from those that are promoting the VPAs and promoting FLEGT licensing.
So the reason I raised that issue is because the next question is on that topic exactly, and I think we pretty much addressed it, but it was from Fern saying that it's true the EU needs to look at themselves in the mirror for not promoting FLEGT more strongly. It takes two to tango. Why do you think EU imports from countries like India, and as you just mentioned, Brazil, are increasing while those from some VPA countries are decreasing or stagnating? It's a good question.
Well, I think it does come down to some degree to the intensity of EUTR enforcement in the different countries. I mean, we are hearing that in some countries there are difficulties, especially from India. The imports involve a lot of furniture, which are processed products, where it's very difficult to trace back the components, especially as they are often made of woods that are considered waste woods, or where they are traded on local markets, but it is very difficult. So in order, I mean, that was one of the points we raised, in order to really generate this market advantage for Indonesia in products that are directly competing, which is furniture from India, or is flooring, decking, outside flooring from Brazil. it comes down to these kind of things to create this market advantage to the full.
Okay, well, what I have to say, I'm very impressed because we are very sustainable in generating questions, because we have not more now than when we started, and we've dealt with quite a few. I don't think we're going to get through all of them, but we'll keep going. So from Sofa Mudawam, we have a question: do we have a number, or can it be measured, of the wood sourced from Indonesia exported to other countries, in particular China, processed and then exported again into the EU or the UK? I'm going to give that one to Rupert, I think.
That precise number, no, because of the difficulties of tracking wood through China into the EU. Yes, it's very difficult to do that. IMM actually was looking to commission a study looking at specifically that issue, but we were basically told by the EC that there were other agencies better placed to do that work. So we looked to other agencies to produce that sort of data. We haven't been able to access it. I think it's an assumption, but I think there will obviously be some volumes involved, but I'm not sure how large the volumes of re-export from China will be. We do know more broadly that a lot of the wood exported to China now, it used to be sort of 10 years ago, a lot of it used to be re-exported in products to the EU and elsewhere, in the United States. But more recently, generally, the market, the demand for wood in China is coming from this huge and expanding domestic market. And actually, the proportions ending up in China have been rising over the long term. And the proportion that is re-exported has tended to decline. And I think that trend will be accelerating now. Now, particularly after the US-China trade dispute, China is exporting less and consuming more domestically. That's a big change in economics in China itself.
Yeah, we need our next IMM project in China, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to keep moving because we're running out of time. Another one from James Hewitt concerning Indonesia: does SVLK certification require products from plantations or logging concessions in natural forests to be certified for sustainability under the PHPL? Is PHPL weaker than PFC? And do either require assessments of the illegalities which might arise prior to award of permits? Well, that's a big question. And you know what, on that one, I'm going to use my discretion as question moderator / chair to say, Rupert and Sarah, please answer that one directly bilaterally with James, because we've had a lot of feedback on the SVLK and the PHPL in Indonesia, so they can give you the details of that. I would just like to say, because it is important to mention PHPL, because yes, it is a sustainability standard, and yes, as part of SVLK, there is a requirement that after a period of 3 or 4 years, I'm not sure the exact, that they do move towards this sustainability standard. So yes, SVLK is providing assurance of sustainability.
And just to add on whether it's weaker or not than PFC, actually it's something that IMM has recommended from our first year, that there would be a sort of analysis comparing PHPL to FSC and PFC, because in Europe hardly anyone is aware of PHPL, and that's very important to be aware of the sustainability component. As far as I know, the MFP4 project is now working on a comparison, I think, of FSC with PHPL. So we are also waiting to see these results.
Yeah, and there's no doubt that the proliferation of different kind of certification and sustainability standards is not, it doesn't make it easy for the average person in the street to be able to understand what is going on, that's for sure. But anyway, moving on from Carolyn Duhesme, I hope I pronounce it something close. Have you been able to estimate the impact on tropical wood markets of the guidance that could be given to FLEGT license system following EU FLEGT fitness check? I think we dealt with that a bit.
We don't know the outcome of the fitness check is the short answer.
Oh, it's still a work in progress. I mean, you know, at least from our side, what we hope is that whatever comes out of this review of the fitness of the EUTR and the FLEGT system in general is not basically getting rid of it, that somehow in whatever new legislation that might be being dreamed up to promote deforestation-free supply chains, etc., that the FLEGT and the VPA still have a role. But certainly, I think there would be a lot of disappointment in the tropical countries that have invested a lot of their own time and energy in this if the system just was somehow discarded or cut off. But I think probably it's better not to spend a lot of time on that because it's really speculation. And unless we have somebody here from the European Commission or from an EU country that wants to take the floor, I think I'll just move on that one. Next one is again from Mike Jeffrey to Dave. Are you getting much pickup on your work promoting FLEGT and communicating the importance of forest and timber sector governance amongst fellow European trade bodies?
Yes and no. I think we certainly get a lot of the different trade associations asking for information about it. Can they, you know, and if they can use the materials that we've created in their own newsletters and so on. But I have to say, it's been very difficult to measure when you've got a global pandemic and everybody's shut down. Everybody's been focused on their own stuff, things within their own country, and
survival
makes it very difficult to really measure the impact of something like this. It's not something we're going to stop doing. We intend to kind of continue this throughout next year, and when we'll have the exhibition then in November again, and it'll be a slightly different take. We will reuse some of the materials we've done, create some new stuff, but we want to keep pushing it for indefinitely. And like you said, Steve, whatever happens about the sort of FLEGT outcome, the concept of governance is something that's central to all of the materials we've created, and I think that's something we're going to keep pushing regardless.
Yeah, and I think you just answered Mike Jeffrey's next question, which was, can you say what place FLEGT will have in your timber manifesto? I mean, to me, it sounds like it's going to stay pretty central, regardless of what happens, in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we're talking about a manifesto, really, we're just calling on governments. And I think that it does have to be government action. We can have the private sector really campaigning for something, but there's lots of private sector initiatives out there, and they can get pushed to one side, they can be ignored, they can be sort of, just sort of pushed aside in the long term. Government initiatives can't, and it does need to be a government-led thing. We can suggest it, we can put it on the table and say that we would all support it and try and get an alliance, but whatever happens in the future, whatever the outcome is, we do need, and part of that manifesto is really calling on governments to take the action and to make the running on this.
Great, thanks a lot. I realize we're at our time. I'm going to go for an extra 10 minutes if Sarah allows me. Right? I think we can go 10 minutes and try to get through a few more questions. And we probably won't get through them all, so I apologize for that, but we'll keep going. So from Sigmar Schoenherr, with the EU now putting up question marks over existing FLEGT instruments, for example, licensing, what's your take on the next steps for implementing TLAS, timber legality assurance systems, and not losing the momentum FLEGT has brought to governance improvement in FLEGT countries? It seems ITTO has already picked up the discussion with their course on legal and sustainable supply chains. Yeah, exactly. I mean, we are trying to focus on legality and sustainability. I mean, but that, the thing is these things sound like they're new, but basically it's what ITTO has been doing for the past 30 years since it came into existence, and what the TFF has been doing. Basically we're trying to promote wood as a good material that is produced sustainably. So, but anyway, Sarah, do you want to try to say something about that? I mean, the next step for implementing timber legality assurance systems, to me, I at least from ITTO's point of view, whether there is, of course, FLEGT can provide a positive signal, but whether there's a FLEGT or not, countries should continue to develop their governance systems and their timber legality assurance systems because they're necessary. But please, Sarah, do you want to say something?
Well, I think it's very hard to say anything at this stage because we are all waiting for this final report on the fitness check, and then once we know where we stand, I think it's important to work from there and see where things will be moving. I think we look at working with Dave and hear what he proposes in his manifesto. And yeah, I think very hard to say at the moment, as long as there's no clear message from the EU. We are just waiting for that report.
Let's have another webinar in 6 months and we can take stock. Yeah, go ahead, please.
I just want to add, I mean, looking at the figures I put up at the start of my presentation, this thing has got a life of its own. This is an enormous process. It's not actually dependent on the EU FLEGT thing anymore in that sense. It's something that is self-generating, the fact that most markets now are requiring some form of due care, due diligence. Markets like the United States, like Japan itself, South Korea, these markets now are demanding some form of due diligence. So it makes sense for exporters wherever they are to develop these timber legality assurance systems, and the scope of the systems in place already are considerable. And it's something, this is a very powerful process. It needs to be built on now. And I think the opportunity is really there to build on it.
Excellent, Rupert. And you can keep going because Mike Jeffries wants to know if we know what factors might be behind Indonesia's increase in timber and wood exports to the EU and UK since 2016, other than FLEGT licensing. So is there other
than FLEGT? Well,
fashion?
Yes, I mean, again, with the trade surveys that we've done and the furniture report, we have looked into some detail in what factors are driving it, and certainly. We know in Indonesia itself that there has been quite a policy focus on improving trade and exports broadly. That seems to be playing a role. It has improved the relative competitiveness, I think, Indonesia generally. But we know, of course, Indonesia itself has a very, very strong reputation for the quality of its workmanship, the quality of its furniture products, the quality of its tropical plywood is second to none. So we know it has this huge reputation for good quality, good workmanship. There are, of course, issues with logistics, that sort of thing that get in the way. But at the same time, these factors have all contributed to the improvement. But underlying it, we can't really separate it out from the improvement in reputation, overall reputation that has been contributed by the SVLK and the FLEGT licensing process. Underlying it, there is more confidence, I think, in importing from Indonesia than there would have been without that process.
Yeah, completely agree. Sarah, I think this one's for you from Sofa Mudawam again. Do we have a more concise date on when the FLEGT VPA JEM will be held? I'm just going to display my ignorance right away and say I have no idea what a JEM is, but I hope you do.
Yes, it's a joint expert meeting. I'm guessing that refers to Indonesia. So as far as I'm aware, it has been postponed from May to July, August, but I don't have a fixed date yet either.
Right. Okay. From Mexico, Jorge Ruiz. Do we have plans to include Mexico or Latin America to create capacities in the program? Well, Rupert, you can clarify, but I mean, all of the statistical analyses look at timber trade, I think, from most countries, but in terms of Mexico and Latin American countries, so far, I think Honduras has just recently signed a VPA. So we will start to include them specifically in the VPA countries in our analysis. Sarah or Rupert, do you want to say anything else?
Rupert, do you want to?
Well, yeah. Well, alongside Honduras, of course, is Guyana, is another country which is completed negotiations and still awaiting ratification. So we do include coverage specifically of those two countries, and also, yes, with regard to trade data, one of the things, yeah, we will hopefully be able to include Mexico, for example, in the STIX database. I think that data is available. We will certainly very interested in what is happening in Mexico at the moment partly because of the US China trade dispute. Mexico's position is very interesting now in the supply of wood furniture, particularly to the US and to wider markets. So yeah, we're taking an interest in that, yes.
Great. Sarah, Hugh Speechley wants to know if you can expand on the link between FLEGT and green finance. And I know we just did a study on on the possible impacts of FLEGT on investment in tropical countries. So you can say a few words about that.
Yes, I mean, this was just one of the proposals or ideas that came out of this study, was to give incentive for importing FLEGT licensed timber by, or working with FLEGT licensed timber, processing it by giving sort of preferential financing conditions to companies who are processing such products, to give sort of make sure there are green bonuses in some form. I don't know, Dave, if you want to say something to this as well, because I think in the UK this has been considered already and completely independently of our study.
Yeah, so there was a green finance initiative, a bit like export credit guarantees. It offers a degree of insurance and assurance, sort of underwrites the risks associated with importing from various tropical countries, but it will only do that in relation to, you know, a kind of a government approved scheme, you know, whatever that may be. And they were looking to pilot it for timber, using FLEGT as an example, and then use it for other commodities. If schemes could be set up for other kind of forest risk commodities, then this you know, finance mechanism could underwrite the risks associated with importing those sustainable things, really to stimulate the trade. It didn't take off because they were trying to do it this year, and it wasn't so much any fault with the mechanism itself. There was just basically so many problems with logistics, shipping, and all the other associated issues about COVID and where people were getting material from, the price of shipping, the cost, and things like that, which changed people's importing patterns and what have you. But I still think it you know, it's got legs. I think it can work in the future, and it should work. And I think FLEGT is a good, or whatever, you know, FLEGT version 2.0, whatever comes out of the fitness check stuff. I also think, coming back to Rupert's point, when it comes to about green finance, you will attract more finance and you will look like a safer and better place to put money as a country, or as a supply chain, as a business sector within any tropical country, if you have a very strong legal framework with monitoring and everything else that comes with the VPA process and the VPA agreements and the FLEGT licensing. You look like a better home for money than a country which doesn't have that. And I think that, you know, also that could explain some of the points when we talked about the increase in exports from Indonesia. There has been a lot more investment going into things like quality and factory production control and all of the other things which fit with a sort of an, you know, an auditing culture within business. And so I do think that there is a big link between governance and finance, or you know, FLEGT and finance, which is bigger than just that single initiative about import promotion.
Definitely. And, you know, we can just take a look at how we make our own investment decisions, you know, whether we put it into the Cayman Islands or keep it in our own countries, you know. So yeah. I think it's pretty obvious. We're really out of time here. We're at 10 past the hour. I'm gonna give one more question to Rupert in the order it came in. I apologize to anybody who's still left on the list. We still have about 10 more, but Sarah, maybe you can take an effort to respond to these people through the chat if they want to hang on for a minute, but I think we need to wrap up. Rupert, the last one is about Ghana. You mentioned in talking about Ghana that the logistics were slowing down the export of wood from Ghana to the EU and UK. Can you throw a bit more light on that, and if that's going to improve in the future, or what do you see?
Okay, I suppose my comment was not specific to Ghana. It was much more of a broader comment about the problems of logistics generally. And I think I emphasized the big problem recently has been the shipment from Asia into Europe, where obviously there were severe logistical problems. Ghana, I have to say, I'm not very familiar with the issues of Ghana. I do understand that Ghanaian shipments tend to be slightly shorter and more reliable than other parts of of Africa, but I wouldn't be able to comment on the specifics with regard to Ghanaian logistics. So I wish I could give you more, but perhaps it's a question we could try and answer later in writing.
Sure. Okay, well, thanks to all the panelists, and especially thanks to everybody who logged in and participated so vigorously in the question and answer session. It was very interesting and very good discussion. What I want to point out in wrapping up is that I think, as was already alluded to, all the presentations that were made, the PowerPoints, I think Sarah will make those available on the IMM website. Is that right, Sarah?
Yes, and they will also be circulated to everyone who has registered to the webinar.
If you gave an email, you're going to get them.
Yeah.
And yeah, we would encourage you, I think, as Sarah's already done, to sign up to receive the IMM newsletter that comes out, I think, every 3 or 4 months. And you know, as you know, I think one of the resounding messages is that those of us who care about forests, and especially tropical forests, have a responsibility to kind of carry the torch, and as Dave said, to keep pushing for governance and improvements in governance, regardless of whether we have a FLEGT or VPAs or whatever. I hope they do continue, but you know, I think the main job we should do is keep this going. This project specifically, funded by the EU to independently monitor the market for FLEGT licensed timber, is going to go for about another 1.5 years. We have about another 1.5 years of extended time to run it, and we hope that we'll be able to run a couple more of these webinars, especially since we're getting a lot of interest in the work that we're doing. And I think that as we have more information, and especially as it becomes a little bit clearer what the EU is going to do, it's probably a good idea to convene again. So with that, Sarah, do you want to say a final goodbye to everybody, since you started the show off today in my absence, which I apologize for?
Yeah, well, you had a very good reason for not being there at the beginning, so you're excused. Well, yeah, just also from my side, thank you all very much for logging in, for participating, for being so active and interested in the question and answer session. Thank you also, Dave, for again being part of one of our events. Always great to have you. And
thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And nothing else to add. So we are trying to answer the last remaining questions in chat now. Rupert and I will share them between us. And yeah, hoping to see you again next time, either in a webinar or maybe live again in one of our trade consultations.
Oh, what a concept. Live. Okay. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye-bye.